Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the January 9th, 2020 Substandard Living Conditions Special Committee. I will preside for the moment and take attendance. Alderman Jetty?
Here.
Alderman Lopez is missing. Alderwoman Elizabeth Liu?
Here.
Alderman Skip Cleaver?
Here.
Also with us tonight, we have Alderman Klee. The first thing we do, of course, is to elect the committee clerk. So if someone would like to make a motion. Elizabeth? Would you like to make a motion?
I'd like to nominate Alderman Jetty to serve as
Perfect.
clerk.
Thank you.
A lot of hesitation on that.
Are there any other
wasn't sure.
nominations? No, there's no other nominations.
Mail here for you, Jan.
Well, I guess then, Alderman Cleaver, would you like to close nominations?
Yes, I'll second the motion, close nominations.
Okay, so everyone who would like to see Alderman Jetty as our new clerk, say aye. Okay, that's done. So now you're in charge and you start taking notes. So this is the first meeting of this session, and we have some new people here. And so we should probably give a little conversation about what this committee does and what it should do in the future. The very first year that it was in place, it did quite a bit. It did a lot of studying of the issues. It spoke to a lot of people, studied problems that were showing up, and cleared up quite a few things as well. The following year, there were very few things to do other than perhaps just keep checking on what was happening with the substandard housing. Meetings were held. There were folks that were brought in from various committees, various departments to talk about what we can do in this committee. But so far, our committee is just supposed to look at substandard housing. And if you think that we could do more, if there's something else that should be done under that same umbrella, that's something we should talk about.
So, could I
Absolutely.
comment on that?
Alderman Jetty.
So this committee is a special committee
It is.
that was created by ordinance, and it back in 2015, and it provides the ordinance provides the committee is responsible for investigating the living conditions at large residential properties where there may be substandard living conditions, determining whether these conditions violate existing housing and/or health codes, and recommending whether new housing and/or health code provisions should be enacted to protect Nashua residents. So that's what the ordinance says. And as I understand it, this committee was created in response to problems that existed at 2 or 3 specific locations. Yes. And the committee ended up recommending that that a new way of assessing or penalizing violations would occur. So in the past, if there was a code violation, after trying to work, as I understand it, the code enforcement people would try to work with whoever was responsible to try to remedy the situation. And then if that failed, then they would file a complaint with the circuit court, and it was dealt with by the court. The code enforcement people asked, and the the Board of Aldermen ultimately passed a new system that provided for the code enforcement people could first, after trying to work with the responsible party, issue a ticket, a fine for, and there was a schedule for first violation, second violation, without having to go through the court process. And the responsible party this is what exists now, can appeal that to the court. But they don't have to, and it's a much more efficient way of dealing with this situation. So after that was done, the committee kind of stopped doing anything except, the last 2 years, those of us who were on the committee under Alderman Lopez's chairmanship, invited some landlords to talk about different problems, invited tenants to talk about problems, invited the city code enforcement people from the code enforcement, the health department, and others to talk about how they dealt with various situations. But we never saw the need to sponsor any legislation. And we did kind of touch upon some issues that were probably beyond the scope of this ordinance. So I don't know if we wanted to go beyond that. If we there is a committee, a standing committee. I think it's the Personnel and
Human Affairs.
Human Affairs Committee that has as one of its charges is dealing with affordable housing. I think that's the right committee, but there is a committee. Excuse me?
Excuse me, I apologize for interrupting you, but I don't believe it covers the problems within the affordable housing, more to create it of that nature, if I'm not mistaken.
It's just about the lack of housing, is that
I
what?
think so. I think that's more what we deal with, and that, not if there's issues with it or trying to get code enforcement or anything else like that. And I
sorry,
apologize, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, Alderman Clea, it's important.
My understanding is that the affordable housing is to work with contractors to make sure that a certain percentage is set aside. It has nothing to do with
The living conditions.
within those conditions afterward. My understanding.
So, if I could.
Absolutely.
So it's the Human Affairs Committee that is responsible for community development block grants, affordable housing, grant acceptance, elderly affairs and the like, and review and comment activities.
So that's already taken care of then, that portion of what we would be interested in working on.
I'm not sure how responsible for affordable housing, how that's defined, but that is there.
Alderman Clea, are you on that? You aren't on that
I'm
committee?
on Human Affairs Committee, and I know I'm not part of this committee, but I just to put my 2 cents in. First off, the Human Affairs affordable housing is not about the living conditions, but the making availability of it, giving grants. We do give grants for perhaps windows that need to be replaced and so on, in different types of things of so on. So that's what the community grants are. As far as the living conditions within the housing, that doesn't fall within the Human Affairs. To the best of my knowledge, unless I really missed something on that one, we've never dealt with it and so on. In my opinion, what I'd like to see from this committee is, let me give you an example. Okay, for instance, you've heard me talk about bed bugs and so on. So a residential place, not just a homeowner, a single homeowner, but a rental, has bed bugs. Okay, when the person calls because their landlord is not being receptive enough. So they may call code enforcement. Code enforcement can't go down that day. They have to contact the landlord, make an appointment within X amount of days. And there's state statutes that say that the landlord has got to be responsible within X number of days. It's actually a little bit faster. They have a smaller window, like 7 days, versus 14 days for roaches or something of that nature. But because something like bed bugs is not considered a health hazard, you don't get our Health and Human Services people involved. You get code enforcement to come in and say, this is not good living conditions. They have to have X number of hours, X number of days, X number to give a heads up to the landlord. They can't come in and do an inspection. Then they can come in and do an inspection, but they can only necessarily inspect that one unit. They can't inspect all the units. So there's, and this might be helpful for you, is to possibly get, and I'm blanking at his last name, I know his first name is Bill, from code enforcement here to possibly talk to you about what their constraints are, because that is really important. He is constrained by having to give notice and having to give, so even if a resident called and said, I have a window that I can't open up because if I open up, it's going to come down and my hand or my child's hand or something like that, so I can't even open up the windows. They still have, that's a safety issue, so they can get in there faster, but they still have to get a hold of the landlord, get an appointment, and so on. So I think that's a good idea for you to kind of get what those standards are. And offhand, they're rattling in my brain, and I can't think of them specifically. But I think that might be helpful to do that. There's a landlord component in every complaint. So, for instance, if a landlord has bed bugs, the landlord didn't put the bed bugs in there, someone came in and did it. There's statutes within the state that says the person who brought them in and an inspector can tell them who it was that brought them in if they look at all of them. Then it's their responsibility, but then the landlord does have to pay for all the other units to have them cleaned and so on. So that's an expense to them. So, we have to have a heart and not kind of put a hammer down on them. But at the same time, there are people that are living there. They can't move because they have these critters and so on. And I'm using bed bugs as an example because that's really one of the big issues that we have. And they're all over the country. They're not in just low-income housing. They're in very expensive houses. It's the cockroach of the, of the 70s and the 60s and so on. But they're very disconcerting when they're biting children and so on. And people are afraid. Renters are afraid to make a big stink about it because they're afraid they'll be thrown out. And if they're thrown out with the label of, you have bed bugs, they're never going to get into, because who's going to want to rent to them? So they can get blackballed. And there's this whole big thing and scary issue of what's going on. So I think as far as this committee is concerned, you do need to get code enforcement in here to explain to you what their limitations are. If there was going to be any kind of possible legislation that might come out of this, it may be to help them, as the first one did. You might want to talk to them and say, is there needs that you have? Now, I explained about the issue with the landlords having the cost and the issue with the renters. Well, there's also other issues of if they come in and they do chemical things, and I know we're trying to fix it in the State House, but there's also the issue of not being told, as a renter, I'm not being told what the different chemicals are that are still residing through my whole home, and I might have a child so what are my rights and so on. So I'd really like to see the Substandard Living Condition Committee kind of look at all of those things in general. What is it that...
Require a list of the...
Yeah,
chemicals.
and I think the chemicals really should be given, even before they come into the house. These are the chemicals we're going to spray. You should be out for 12 hours. You should be out for 24 hours. What is this kind of thing? Everything we do is going to affect everybody. I know, for instance, when bed bugs are sprayed, you have to leave for 24 hours. What are these people doing for those 24 hours? Where are they going to be living? What is going to be doing? That is not our charge, and I'm not asking you to do that charge. I'm just saying that that's a real problem and so on. So there's all these things that go through it and all the heartaches that everybody on both sides are facing. And that's why I really would like to see you work with code enforcement. I'd like to see making a list of, and I know we've dealt with DHHS, and they, to some extent, get the word out. This is an issue, and this is what you need to do. Don't have clutter, don't have that. And I think they're trying to do as good a job as possible. But I think that you need to be a PSA. You need to find out what we can do to help landlords and that. And I see Substandard is more of a renter's kind of issue. Yeah, it's not a homeowner, you know, I mean, if my neighbor had a place that was all broken down and so on, and I know they have children, we'd probably tell them to call law enforcement than it coming to here. Do you understand what I'm saying? But renters have very little voices. And at the same time, landlords could be raked over the coals. We got to weigh both of those things. And I think that if that should be a good place for you guys to get your bearings. And so
Definitely need to have health in, because they have lots of information that we could use to make good decisions on. So maybe we'll have them in one day. Alderman or Alderwoman?
Woman,
it says Alderwoman there.
woman, please.
Alderwoman, Lou, would you like to speak?
I didn't raise my hand.
Oh,
But if you'd like, I can give
Sure.
my,
please.
I mean, I think that's basically the main comment that I have right now is I wonder if we, because I've done some reading. I thank you. You had Donna send me the first year. I think it was Alderman Clee.
No, me.
No, it was
okay.
Alderman Schmidt that asked you.
And you know, I read through that and I got an understanding of how it, the genesis of the
Yes.
group, and then I've gone through last year, so I've got that sense of what's been going on. It seems as though there's been some mission creep, and I am a little bit. I am wondering, are the penalties still being applied, and is that success? Has that been successful? Because Alderman Jetty, you mentioned the penalty system.
That's a terrific question. I think we should have code enforcement in, and we should find out exactly how many they're seeing and what their penalties are, and how often they have to repeat in certain places. That's a terrific idea.
We're not, because we're not hearing the same, we're not hearing about the
We
same
wouldn't,
kinds of complaints,
yeah.
or are we still getting a list of how many complaints per, I don't know.
We
year
haven't
or-
gotten anything, so we'll have code come in and we'll let them know that's what we need.
It just hasn't risen to the top,
Yeah.
to the elevation that it did back in 2015 when there were TV shows about it, I guess. Is that correct?
Apparently, dividing the issues between it's substandard because the window is broken or something like that, and the bed bugs were separated. I think that's the issue, and I think that the bed bug issue was something that stayed in this for further study, because it's just such a huge issue. Alderman Clee?
Yeah. I just lost my train of thought here for a second.
sorry.
No. That's okay. That's okay. But the numbers. Okay. One of the things is with the issues with numbers and collecting data, you have to be really careful, because right now there's a bed bug registry for hotels, and people can. They don't report it themselves. Other people report it. And when a hotel goes in and cleans up, that still stays there. So if we were to collect numbers, you have to remember that everything we collect is public information. So if someone were to go to whichever organization was collecting this, they could say, I want to see the names and the addresses and so on who've had bed bugs or this. And that could create especially if they've gone through and they've really cleaned and they've done all the right things, this could create a problem. I'd like to see a tickler list. I spoke to, I wish he were here at the moment, but I spoke to Alderman Lopez, and I think we are not keeping through DHH, through our Health and Human Services, and through code enforcement. I do not believe we're keeping any numbers on bed bugs. And the reason I say it is because the last time he gave some form of report, I said, why aren't there anything here? And he says, we're not collecting that data. I would love to see that data collected in a generic way. But if we do that, how do we know if the same units or the same address is being brought? So it has to be done in, not privacy, but because I want it to be able to be that, but not in a way to harm anybody, because it doesn't just harm the landlord. Remember, there is a renter that is living there, and if that renter moved out, and this becomes public knowledge, there may be a way through Right to Know to find out where that renter was living, and did they have bed bugs before I rent to them. So we have to be really cautious, and I keep using bed bugs because that's the most extreme thing that we have, and that can hurt people. You know, I want to call it the plague of today. Is what it is.
My thought is just, but if the city code violations or who, first of all, whoever the tenants go to, they must keep some record of where they were called to and how often. I mean, that data must be available, and as substandard living committee, it seems to me we would want to be aware of that. And I hear what you're saying about, I'm just surprised that there would be such a stigma
Oh, yeah.
A
about.
very huge
Oh, there's-
stigma, yeah.
Pardon me for speaking out, but I can tell you there is a severe stigma to the point of, I'm serious, to the point of where people, I would knock on doors and see children with bites on them and ask them, come out and ask them, are you having a bed bug issue? And them look at me and say, no, knowing that they have a bed bug issue, and I can't do anything. I can't get code enforcement there. I can't get anything there because they're afraid. They're afraid to be thrown out on the street. These are people that are literally living from month to month, check to check, sometimes paycheck, sometimes, you know, assistance. And they're afraid. They're afraid if it becomes known that they won't be able to do that. And maybe they're waiting to get housing, you know, and if it's known, they're not going to get that housing. And then they're afraid that the landlord will say they brought them in.
Has anyone ever,
Hang on a sec, one more time. Yeah, go ahead,
So, point of order.
certainly.
So these committee meetings are recorded, and so there's a little computer thing here. And so after the meeting is over tomorrow morning, one of the assistants is going to take that thing and then type up the minutes, okay? So we have to, we can't just speak when we want to speak. We have to ask the chair for recognition, so the chair can say Alderman Clee, or Alderman Lou, or Alderman Cleaver, or Alderman Jettie,
It makes it
so
easier
that
for
the
them.
person transcribing knows who's
Yes.
speaking, especially, you know, with a newly formed committee, she's not familiar with the voices, so
Thank you, Alderman
I would
Jettie.
ask to,
That's a good idea. Did you have something else to add?
yes, if Alderman Lou was finished.
I am.
Okay. So, you know, during we were on the committee, Alderman Schmidt and I were on the committee the last 2 years. Were you on the committee? No.
No.
So,
May I interrupt for just a second? The reason that we have Alderman Clee with us today is because she knows this issue intimately. It's in her ward. It's not in my ward, well, except for one building. I don't think you have any housing like that.
there are no bed bugs in Ward 5.
And that's on recording, yes. I think that it's a special issue that she could bring to us, so thank you. So you were saying, who you were saying?
I was saying, Alderman Jettie was saying that during the last year or two that the committee, the code enforcement people did come and speak to us, and Ren Bodwin from the health department came and spoke to us, and I guess he's an entomologist and a bed bug expert. And we learned, I think we learned during those sessions that that the state legislature took the bed bug issue away from the city, that it's now regulated by state statute, and that if somebody has a bed bug problem, there's a procedure outlined in the state statute. I'm not that familiar with it, but I think it requires them to notify the landlord. The landlord has some time to deal with the issue, and if the tenant is unsatisfied, they have to go to the circuit court and file a complaint against the landlord, and so there's a hearing before the circuit court, and the circuit court deals with it. We were told, if I remember correctly, that the city code enforcement has nothing to do with bed bug complaints and in dealing with removing bed bugs. It's, the legislature has taken it away and provided a procedure for the tenant and the landlord to deal with this issue between the two of them, and if they can't resolve it, then the court gets involved. I don't know if my recollection is correct, but we can have Mr. Bodwin come in again and
I think that's a
the
good
code
idea.
enforcement people and kind of refresh our memories about that issue.
Alderman Clee?
Cleaver.
Thank you.
Cleaver.
Get one more syllable. Alderman Cleaver.
Yeah, when I was assigned to this, or when I saw it on the list and all that sort of thing, my inclination was, well, it's going to deal with heat that's turned off, or power that's turned off, or broken windows, stove that's not working, or some other problem that people are having where living is very difficult in these conditions. And I think that it should therefore go well beyond bed bugs. I mean,
Oh, yes.
I realize bed bugs is a serious problem. And I'm sure that the genesis of this committee was a bed bug issue, I believe was on Broad Street at one time,
Yes.
a couple years ago. But to me, it should be much more comprehensive than that, because we know there are problems with landlord response when people are freezing or unable to cook or have no hot water, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that we have to broaden our horizons a little bit, at least in my opinion.
Excellent.
And could-
No, I'm sorry. He's part of the
Alderman
committee
Jettie.
first, yes.
So, those types of issues are, we have ordinances that deal with that, and we have a code enforcement department, we have a health department, fire department, police departments, that are all charged with enforcing that. And, I think that the purpose of this committee is not to oversee those departments and what they're doing. It's only to, if we become aware of either through our constituents complaining to us, or if the code enforcement department themselves feel that they don't have the tools necessary to deal with these situations, then we can see whether or not the codes, the ordinances need to be changed or added to, or whatever. As I understand it, that's, the ordinance that created this committee was to determine whether the substandard living conditions, whether there are substandard living conditions in large residential properties, and whether these conditions violate existing housing and/or health codes, and recommending whether new housing or health code provisions should be enacted to protect Nashua residents. So, as I see our role, it's to, make sure that the ordinances provide sufficient regulation, and it's not to deal with individual complaints. We have code enforcement office and the health department, that are the first responders, so to speak. And I think, having them come and report to us about how things are going is an excellent idea. And I think we ought to, see what they say, whether there are whether everything's fine, or whether there are still problems, and whether they need us as all, the Board of Aldermen to do anything to assist them or not.
I read the ordinance myself, and I didn't think of this until you mentioned it. Does it mention what a large residential?
It doesn't. Alderman Jettie says it does not.
Well, you were still speaking, so I figured you were okay. That's interesting. I think we need to have, visit with us, code enforcement, the fire department, the health department, police, and if anybody else can think of another organization within the government that could give us feedback on what they've seen over the last couple of years, whether or not code enforcement has seen a great many of these, and working with fines, perhaps they've solved much of the reluctance that they felt before came from landlords, because this is a much cleaner way to deal with things. So if we could, yes, Alderman Cleaver.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that the first thing we need to do if we're going to address a problem or problems is to find out if there are problems
Right.
and how serious they are and how prevalent they are throughout the city. And so the more information we can get from those actors who deal with enforcing code now could tell us more about
Yes.
what kind of issues they're dealing with, so that we could adjust the recommendations for legislation accordingly.
Good. Yes.
I agree
Alderman
with
Clee.
Alderman Clee here. I absolutely agree with everything that that you're saying, that having those people involved. And to Alderman Jetty's comment, I think it was 2014, and I looked it up a while ago, and I want to say it was HB 540 that started addressing bed bugs. I didn't recall it being taken away from the state, the city. They changed the reporting, so instead of, in other words, they have to remediate within 7 days, I think it was. They have to acknowledge within 72 hours or something like that. And the renters are not allowed to refuse entry. That's, I thought, what the state statute did, but I could be wrong. But when I remember reading it, I remember that it basically where right now the landlord has to ask for permission, give 24 hours notice to get in there. I thought with the bed bugs, you couldn't refuse entry when they want to come in and do an inspection and so on. But I could be wrong. I'm just thinking out loud and what that is. But I like the idea of all of these people coming to it. But I also want to reiterate one of the things as an alderman that gets these phone calls. And I'm sure Alderman Lopez gets the same thing. And I know for a fact he does, because as I was knocking doors trying to get gift cards for, I know for a fact I had a number of people that lived in his ward that said, this is an issue I'm having with leaking in my roofs and this. And I said to him, and bad heat and so on. And I said to them, well, get a hold of Alderman Lopez, but also contact code enforcement and do that. I think we need to have a full policy as to what people have to do. And I think as a city, and to even to help aldermen such as myself that are dealing with these kind of things. And while I think that the border that you've put up to not allow bed bugs into Ward 5 is very adamant, but trust me, bed bugs are everywhere, including residential homes, but they're much easier to get rid of out of residential homes. They literally do a wrapping of your home, and they can take care of it in that way. But the thing is, this is an epidemic everywhere. I don't want to stick with bed bugs, but I want to stick with fair conditions of not having a leaking ceiling or not having plumbing where there's no hot water and so on. And I don't think you should deal with the individual cases. I think that's probably more for somebody like me to get a hold of code enforcement. But when we start seeing a plague, I see it in Ward 3 and so on, that's when I want to bring it to a committee such as this and say, what can we do to help code enforcement, because they're bound by certain rules and laws and so on.
If they need our assistance,
Yeah.
that would be something we could manage. We should also probably look at state statutes so we understand what the limitations are, because I do recall the same thing that you're
I think it was
mentioning.
2014, yeah.
Bed bugs were,
Agencies.
bed bugs were actually set aside as a totally different kind of issue
Yeah.
from heat and water and mold or anything like that. It was set aside as a very different issue because basically it is a different kind of issue. It does travel with people instead of be a problem with not taking care of the property itself. So we'll maybe one of us would be willing to do the research on state statutes and see. I don't know anybody who might be willing to do that. Do I, Alderman Jettie?
Sounds like he's done the work.
I think that, during the last term, when the code enforcement people appeared before us, or maybe it was the health department
think it was
with
health.
Ren Bodwin,
Yeah.
they gave us the laws. And I think I remember there being a pamphlet about bed bugs.
There is.
And it talks about, what bed bugs look like, what to do if you find them, the whole process, the whole procedure of notifying what you should do and what the landlord needs to do, and the whole process was laid out. And I think there was reference to the state law there, and I think.
Do you still have the card that they gave us?
Yeah, I think it was included in the, you sent, oh no, it was not in the stuff that you sent us. It
No.
was in the minutes of last year's, either last year's or the year before's
Okay.
meetings.
It's on their
And
website.
so I can find that, and I can,
Thank you. That'd be very nice if you could bring that forward. Alderwoman Liu?
I happened to read that today. It's September 12th of 19. It's attached.
It's attached?
of 2019.
Could you send that to our clerk and have her take care of a printing for each one of us so that we could have that to Donna?
Sure.
That'd be really great. Then we'll, yes. And you
I
said?
have a couple of other things I just wanted to, so I realized that some of these things impact people who, does seem like part of our, an important thing for us to consider, whether some tenants are too intimidated to follow the state statute. And it just seems like something that we should address, but I wondered whether having some information that a landlord is required to provide upon, contracting with a tenant, that gives the tenant some information about how their rights or their or contact ways that they can address or help they can seek services that will help them if they feel like an ombudsman, if they feel intimidated, some other way they can go about getting help with something like bed bugs. Or, a lot of people in low-income substandard housing may be there because they don't have any other options, and if anyone, there's probably a lot of people that would feel intimidated about complaining to their landlords. And I wonder if that's part of our work here, is to come up with, just to look at whether that's an issue. And if it is, to maybe provide something to help lessen that.
It's not 211. What is the emergency number for it? It's 211? 211 is often used to contact anything. They have all the data that you could possibly need, but you're right, people don't know about it. And if they don't know about it, they may just be too reluctant to do anything. My worry is intimidation. We know that during the first iteration of the hearings that they'd had, that there were a lot of people that said they were afraid because they had been badly treated in the past when they reported something. And I don't know a solution to that. Maybe that's something else we should talk about. Alderwoman Lou?
Is there anything in this, this code here that addresses what we currently have in the city?
In the city, should be in there, yes. One of the issues that we deal with in New Hampshire is that our law comes down from the state, though. They give us permission to do certain laws. So a lot of our laws are based on what the state has in code. So that's something else. Alderwoman Clee.
I did find the brochure. It's on our website, just to. let you-
211?
No, the
Oh, the bed bug sheet?
yeah.
Yes, thank you.
But just, it does reference HB 482 from 2013. And the 540 from 2014 that I was looking at was in reference to gaining access, the landlord-tenant being able to gain access, and the landlord having to X number of days and so on. So, and this does talk about whether or not they can be evicted for bed bugs and so on. And obviously, the answer is no, you cannot. And it's if they don't follow the 482 guidelines. That one does talk about the 7 days of remediation and having to get an inspector there within 72 hours and so on.
72.
And that was one of the things that Remy did talk to me about when I called him over these issues that I was having, and he was educating me on that too. But again, obviously wearing two hats in the state and the city, I would hate to see that the city has no say on this. I really would like to investigate that because it would be reprehensible if the state said, we're going to take care of all of it and these people have to go to court, because a lot of these people don't have those funds to go to court to get their landlord to do things right and so on. And the city does do inspections, and the city can come and do inspections. But again, this is not a bed bug committee. This is a substandard, which means, as Alderman Cleaver brought up, it's about the heat, and it is about windows falling and possibly being able to hurt, not being able to be opened and so on. It is about the safety hazard. It is about whether or not smoke detectors are there or sprinkler systems, depending on the size of the building and so on. And I understand that bed bugs is just a smaller one, but that is a big issue because there are a lot of older homes, the heating system and windows and different things like that. So a lot of what you're going to do will affect my ward. So I'll be here a lot, guys. Sorry.
Well, with the experience that you've got with your ward, it's awfully important for us to have that.
Yeah.
So, Alderman Jettie.
In looking at the material that you sent us, the minutes of this committee's meetings when it first began, some of the things that I noticed during those first sessions, it was brought out that that our code enforcement is complaint driven.
Yes.
So we don't have the staff to go out and do periodic inspections and we don't have the staff, and I'm not sure that the law permits us to do that. But during those meetings, those initial meetings, Director Marchant talked about how other jurisdictions, she mentioned Manchester, New Hampshire, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Burlington, and Vermont, have a licensing program. The other thing that was brought out is that hotels and motels are not licensed by the city or even the state, that they're completely, not completely, but as far as their rooms and stuff, they're they're not regulated. And she said that other jurisdictions do have, like Manchester, has a licensing program for rental property owners. And so right now, we have no procedure where we do an annual inspection of rental units. And we have no authority whatsoever, if I understand them correctly, over hotels and motels. So I don't know if this is, I don't think we ought to, create problems where there aren't any, or develop regulations or laws to regulate things that don't need regulating. But I think it's something worth looking into, whether or not
Yeah.
it's, it would be something that we should do to provide for some type of authority for the code enforcement people to do inspections without having to have first received a complaint. One of the problems with that is we don't have the staff. So these other jurisdictions have partly answered that by requiring a license, and to get the license, you have to have an inspection. And then to keep the license, you have to have an annual inspection, and they charge a fee for the license to cover the cost of the inspection. So the revenue derived from these licenses finances the cost of the inspectors. Whether or not that's something Nashua should do or not, I'm not saying, I don't know, but it's something that we could look into. And also, when the committee was first formed, Mayor Donchis was on the committee before he was elected mayor. And he talked about looking into whether it would make sense to have an ordinance that would require the daily cleaning of bathrooms and regular inspections of rental units, especially of rooming houses, where, if you,
We can't.
you sent it to us, so I'm sure you read those, those initial hearings or the initial meetings where people complained of,
Yep.
they live in a building where there are many rooms, but not many bathrooms, and so they're sharing bathrooms with other people, and the conditions that they were complaining about. I don't know if that's still a problem or not,
Yes.
and whether or not, something that Mayor Donchis at the time thought was worth looking into is something that we should look into now.
We definitely, when speaking with the health department, they mentioned that they would like licensing. They would very much like it, but they were dissuaded from following up on that. I think we should see what we can do about that. I think licensing would be a good solution to places that tend to have a problem. The other issue that you brought up is the rooming houses. We don't have the right to go into rooming houses. We can only do rentals. Rooms, we can't.
No.
That's one of the biggest problems that we've got. We need permission to go into anything, of course, and that's the other issue. But licensing would help solve that. So we should look into how. Would you be willing to get in touch with the folks in Manchester to see how they handle their licensing of apartments, of rental units?
Yes, of
Thank
course.
you. I'd appreciate that. Alderman Jettie? Yes, Alderman Clee.
I know, I'm such a pain in the neck, I apologize. But my question is, if you don't mind, to Alderman Jettie. Alderman Jettie, when you were looking through the notes and they talked about the inspections and we only do them based on complaints, I'm asking the question because I was given the impression that we did annual inspections on all rentals. and that they would do a periodic when a complaint came in, but they didn't just do a pop-in, in other words, but they would do an annual inspection. And the reason I say that, and I'm not questioning you, I haven't read those minutes, so but I was given the impression, because when I called about this particular place and they were coming and doing, he said to me, we're just about ready to be doing the annual inspection anyway, so we can just push that forward. So I kind of got the impression that we do annual inspections, but you're saying that the minutes said that we don't do them? We just do them based on complaint?
These minutes are from 2014, the very
Oh,
first
okay.
meetings that
Oh, the
we
very
had.
first meeting, I apologize. So maybe things have changed since then,
15.
yeah. Perhaps things have changed since then.
I can forward those three
I'd appreciate
documents
that.
to you so that you can take a read.
And
Alderman Clee?
yeah, Chairman, I forwarded you the two links, one from the HB 482 from 2013.
Thank you.
And the brochure that please share with the committee.
Thank you.
I just thought I'd send it to you and let you forward it on to
Appreciate
them. And that does explain the particular bill and so on. And truthfully, I didn't read it. I just wanted to send it up to you, as well as the brochure, which does talk, as Alderman Jetty said, about the different sizes of the critters and the creepy crawlies.
Yes, Alderman Cleaver.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. We're going to look into licensing for rental properties. It would seem to me that we also ought to look into licensing for room-let, hotels, motels, etc. Because, as I think Ernie pointed out earlier, there is no provision for or standards set up for them. They just go into business, put out a shingle, and that's it. And as far as I know, they're totally unregulated, and therefore totally unsupervised or uninspected, if you will. And considering that the whole genesis, as I said earlier, this was from one of those businesses, as I understand it, there may be a problem well beyond that we don't know of, and there's no way to uncover it.
Well, that's one thing that we can really work towards, is finding the current problems so that we can look for current solutions. Yeah? So what I'd like to do then is to set up the next few meetings to be with code enforcement, the fire department, the health department, police. Is there anyone else that you think should be part of this? If you can, let me know. We'll set it up so that we can learn and maybe solve some of those problems. Does anyone else have anything else? Well, if we're done, we've got our clerk, public comment. We have no one here on public comment. We've done our discussion. Remarks by aldermen. This is a time at the meeting where anything in particular that you have to say about something coming up, something you've learned, something you're waiting for, an honorarium for someone, or nothing? We don't need a non-public session today, so I would call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. All agree? Say aye.
Aye.
Anyone want to stay later?
Nay.
Okay. That means the meeting is completed at 7:45.
7:54.
Thank you.